I arrived just before dusk, the sky a smear of oranges and purples fading into a quiet gray. My father's house stood still and polished as ever, white siding, a trimmed hedge, two American flags stuck into the flower pots like permanent declarations of where authority lived. The air smelled like rosemary and new money. I pushed the door open and paused in the foyer. On the side table sat an envelope printed with gold foil. Inside, the dinner invitation, Everett's face smiling wide in a group photo, flanked by colleagues and my father, all raising champagne flutes. My name wasn't listed anywhere, not even in the font too small to read. Voices drifted from the dining room, Everett's in particular, booming with confidence. We closed in under 6 weeks. That's record turnaround for our market segment. I exhaled slowly, running my fingers over the edge of the photo. I wasn't late, but somehow, I already felt like the event had passed without me. "Coraline," my father called out from the table when he saw me approach, "you made it. That's good. That's good." He gestured to the empty chair next to Aunt Marlene and resumed speaking to Everett. I took my seat, nodded at the table, and offered a polite smile to the dozen familiar faces, cousins, business partners, family friends who only remembered me when they wanted help with grant applications. Dinner was served. Roasted chicken, scalloped potatoes, some overpriced wine from Napa. The kind of spread my mother used to plan before she died and left me with 2 men who thought grief was a performance, and I never learned the script. Halfway through the second course, my father rose with a fork in one hand and his wine glass in the other. "Let's raise a glass," he began, the room settling into quiet. "To Everett, whose success continues to make this family proud. Your brother's work ethic, his achievements, those are the kinds of things that build legacies." I reached for my water glass, heart steady, face composed. Then came the sentence. "And Coraline, well, she's always been around. But let's be honest, she's been more of a burden than anything else." I stopped breathing. A couple of forks clinked awkwardly against plates. Someone cleared their throat. Everett tilted his head and gave a small smirk. Tegan, my oldest friend, sitting diagonally across from me, froze mid-sip and met my eyes with an expression that hovered between horror and rage. But no one said a word. I smiled. Small, tight. Then I cut into my chicken and chewed, slowly. The same way I'd chewed through his dismissals all my life. Years ago, when Everett tanked a startup and I covered the rent. When he crashed Mom's car and I paid the deductible. When he couldn't cover the cost of a luxury retreat and I wired him funds. Just this once. They'd never made a toast to that. After dessert was served, one of my father's golfing buddies leaned in toward me. "You're Everett's assistant, right? I think we met at the city chamber event." I looked at him, spoon halfway to my mouth, then let out a laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. "No, not exactly," I said. "Oh," he waved it off. "You handled the catering, maybe?" Horace didn't correct him. He just kept pouring wine. I stood, excused myself, and headed toward the kitchen to refill coffee. Tegan followed a beat later, finding me rinsing a perfectly clean mug just to keep my hands moving. "You good?" she asked. "I'm used to being invisible here," I said. "It's quieter than being wrong." Back at the table, the clatter of plates and casual chat resumed like no social crime had just occurred. Everett laughed too loud, bragged about how his new app would revolutionize digital asset transfers in niche B2B spaces. No one cared what that meant, they just liked how slick it sounded. And I remembered another night, 5 years earlier. I had just launched my nonprofit. We focused on providing digital tools to low-income senior citizens. I was proud, still building, but proud. I shared my vision at dinner, excitedly explaining how we were helping people navigate Medicare portals and housing assistance applications. My father nodded once and said, "Do something real for once, Coraline, not another charity hobby." Everett had just failed his second tech venture that year. I had paid for the chicken we ate that night. It was always like this, me carrying weight so they could pretend to float. Now, as I sat silently at the end of this dinner, I counted. Everett's rent, $2,300. His car payment I covered once, $680. The vacation to Lake Tahoe, where he hosted everyone, $5,200, most of it from my bank account. They called me a burden. But my bank statements told a different story. A voice echoed in my mind. Something I'd read once, maybe Brené Brown. Sometimes silence isn't strength, it's self-betrayal. I'd told myself I stayed quiet for peace, but peace never arrived. All I got was erasure. After coffee, I placed my mug gently on the saucer, stood, and slipped my coat over my shoulders. "Leaving so soon?" Horace asked. "I think I've already overstayed," I said. As I walked to my car, laughter followed me like perfume from a party I'd never been truly invited to. I slid into the driver's seat, pressed the ignition, and stared straight ahead. My phone buzzed. 2 emails. Both were from partner organizations congratulating Everett Sable, founder of Project Bridge, for winning a Community Innovation Award. I deleted the first, archived the second, not out of defeat, but because I had seen enough. I knew what this was now, and I knew exactly where to begin. I hadn't planned to stay a minute longer than I had to, but something stopped me as I reached for the front door. The soft hum of the dining room behind me had faded into background noise. Laughter, clinking silverware, small talk about vacation homes and investments. None of it belonged to me. My eyes drifted down the hallway to my father's office. That door was always closed growing up. Off limits. "That room is for real work," he'd say, as if my childhood art projects or college essays didn't count. But tonight, for the first time in memory, it stood slightly ajar. I didn't hesitate long. My heels barely made a sound against the hardwood floor as I moved toward it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the adrenaline still buzzing under my skin from the dinner. Maybe it was something older, something I'd buried under years of obedience and endurance. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just needed clarity. A reason. An answer. The office was dim, lit only by the amber glow of a desk lamp. My father's desk was exactly as I remembered it. Polished walnut, an old-school paperweight shaped like an eagle, a neatly stacked pile of files off to one side. The air smelled like dust and leather. I opened the first drawer. Pens, envelopes, nothing interesting. Then another, labeled in bold Sharpie. Important, legal. Inside were neatly ordered folders, some marked with dates. My fingers paused on one stamped with the current year. I flipped it open. It was the will. Everett Sable shall inherit all family assets and investments. Coraline is omitted for personal reasons. I stared at the sentence for a full minute. No clause, no justification, not even my name spelled out in the rejection. Just the omission, so final, so clean, so calculated. "You have to name something to cut it out," I whispered. I wasn't even named. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I took out my phone and snapped a clear photo, then another just in case. I tucked the pages back into place exactly as I'd found them and closed the drawer without a sound. Long breath in, long breath out. On top of the desk sat a small wooden box, carved with an ornate pattern. It was half open, like someone forgot to lock it. I nudged the lid gently. Inside was a letter, old, yellowed slightly around the edges. My name was written on the front, in my mother's handwriting. It was postmarked 11 years ago. I unfolded it carefully, each line like a voice reaching through time. "You always took care of the pieces others dropped. That's not weakness. That's quiet strength." I blinked hard. She had written this for me, addressed it to me, and yet it had sat here, unopened, unread, unloved, all this time. He never gave it to me. I folded the letter slowly and slipped it into my purse. My mother's words would go where they belong now, next to me, not forgotten in some drawer of discarded truths. I walked out of the office, through the hallway lined with family photos. There was Everett, smiling at his graduation. Everett with Dad on the golf course. Everett at some startup gala. Not a single picture of me in the last 10 years, as if I'd been scrubbed out of the timeline. But I remembered covering half the mortgage once when the market crashed. I remembered staying up nights building my nonprofit's first website while Dad told people I played with social media. I remembered writing Everett's pitch deck for a tech company that folded 3 months later and helping him pick himself back up when Dad didn't answer his calls. I remembered being there. I remembered being useful. And now, I remembered being erased. Driving home through the quiet streets of Sacramento, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need noise. I needed the sound of my own breathing, the rhythm of tires against pavement, the stillness between heartbeats. By the time I reached my apartment, a decision had formed, solid as stone. They will not tell my story for me ever again. I saved the photo of the will and the scanned copy of the letter into a new encrypted folder on my cloud drive, labeled it Truth. No rage, no revenge, just truth. And then I opened the letter again. You always took care of the pieces others dropped. I sat with that sentence, let it settle like a warm stone in my chest. How many times had I heard I wasn't ambitious enough? Not driven, not market-minded, not assertive, but I had been all of those things. They just hadn't come in the shape they valued. My ambition wore flats and filled out grant forms. My strength ran silent, like the undercurrent that keeps the whole ship afloat. They didn't see it because they never looked past the headlines. I got ready for bed, changed into something soft. I brushed my hair, turned off the lights, and lay down with the letter beside me. Not out of sentiment, out of reclamation. I thought that letter was a lifeline. Turns out it was a matchstick. Monday morning started like most others. Gray sky, lukewarm coffee, inbox full of requests I hadn't asked for. I was at my desk at the NGO office when an email popped up from a community partner I hadn't heard from in months. Hope to see you at the Civic Tech Award luncheon today, it read. We're celebrating innovation in digital access, featuring a very familiar face from Project Bridge. I blinked at the message. I hadn't been invited. But the name of our flagship program, Project Bridge, was unmistakable. I clicked on the attached flyer. My eyes stopped cold at the words, honoring Everett Sable, visionary founder. There's nothing more dangerous than silence when the room calls for recognition. I didn't have anything on my calendar that couldn't wait, so I went. The Civic Center was already buzzing when I arrived, guests shaking hands, exchanging cards, holding reusable coffee cups and name tags like merit badges. I kept to the back, slipping into a chair 2 rows from the exit. When the program began, the host took the stage. Today, we honor the man whose vision has revolutionized access for underserved communities across California. My pulse spiked. Please join me in welcoming Everett Sable, founder of Project Bridge. He walked out smiling, confident, in a charcoal suit I recognized from a holiday we spent in Tahoe, another trip I'd helped fund. This began with an idea during the pandemic, he said into the mic, voice smooth, rehearsed. I wanted to bridge tech and real lives, to make tools for those who didn't grow up with them, tools for my father's generation. My father's generation? My breath caught in my chest. That line wasn't his. That was from my very first grant proposal, word for word. The crowd applauded. Some stood. I didn't. I sat there frozen, nails digging into the fabric of my purse, wondering how many people would ever know that speech was built with pieces he didn't write. After the applause faded and the crowd began to mingle, someone tapped my shoulder. A volunteer in a white polo handed me a small, wrapped gift box. Thank you so much for attending, ma'am, she said. This was left with your name. I opened it on the spot. Inside was a thank you card addressed to Mr. Everett Sable, visionary founder of Bridge. It had been handed to me by mistake. I smiled, tucked the card into my coat pocket, and said nothing. So this is how they rewrite history. While you're still alive to watch, I left without another word, no confrontation, no performance, just confirmation. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, lights low, laptop open. I pulled up an old email from 6 months ago, the one where I had forwarded Everett my original pitch deck for Project Bridge. Would love your feedback, I had written. He never replied, but the phrasing, bridging digital equity and dignified access for vulnerable populations, those were my lines, my voice. He hadn't even tried to edit them. He just lifted the whole blueprint. I handed him the blueprint thinking he'd proofread. He just built his own door and locked me out. I stared at the screen for a long time. The cursor blinked, blinking like a pulse, like a slow count towards something I hadn't wanted to believe. That evening, I met Tegan at a quiet coffee shop on J Street. The place smelled like cinnamon and late-stage capitalism. "You saw it, right?" I asked. Tegan didn't flinch. "Streamed the whole thing." "And?" I took a sip of my drink. "You need to stop pretending this is accidental," she said. I laughed. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward. "Girl, inspiration doesn't come with your email header still on the draft." I sighed. Maybe he just got inspired. Maybe he didn't realize how closely— "Coraline." Her voice was sharp. "You've got more receipts than CVS. What are you going to do with them?" I didn't answer right away. The background music hummed low beneath our silence. "He's counting on you doing nothing," she said finally. "That's how people like him win. They wear suits and smiles and trust that the girl who actually did the work will keep playing nice." I nodded, slow. My fingers gripped the edges of the cup, not from anger, but from something deeper. Resolve. That night, I opened a new digital folder on my laptop and named it The Record, Do Not Delete. Into it, I dragged everything: emails, original pitch decks, messages with timestamps, screenshots of the award program, even the thank you card addressed to Everett. I took a photo of that too. "I don't want war," I said out loud. "But I will not be erased." I exported everything into a single PDF file and uploaded it to a secure private drive under the name Truth, if needed. Then I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the quiet settle in. They think I've stayed quiet because I'm weak, but silence can be storage. The text came late Friday night, in the family group chat that no one ever used unless it was to organize something about Everett. "Hope everyone can join us for Dad's milestone birthday brunch," it read. No mention of names, no direct message, just a blanket announcement and a flyer with Everett's logo at the bottom. I nearly deleted it, but my mother's voice floated into my head like it had so many times before. Sometimes you show up not for them, but for yourself, to remind the room you still exist. So, I showed up. Saturday morning, I pulled into the underground garage of Everett's high-rise, my car looking embarrassingly modest among the lineup of Range Rovers and Teslas. The elevator doors opened onto the rooftop where the brunch was held, sunlight streaming, a saxophonist playing softly in the corner, and rows of white chairs facing a stage set up beneath a massive 70 balloon arch. I carried one small bag. Inside, a framed quote from my mother's journal: "You can't teach dignity, but you can live it." I wrapped it myself, ribboned it quietly. It was all I had to give. Everett was already mingling, dressed like a magazine ad, schmoozing local donors, a few press faces I vaguely recognized. My father stood near the mimosa bar, laughing too loudly at something some ex-councilman had said. No one looked up when I arrived. During the meal, waitstaff moved briskly between tables, serving quiche and smoked salmon on porcelain dishes. I sat near the back, beside a cousin who only ever texted when she needed help writing a cover letter. Midway through the second toast, Horace stood and tapped his glass. "I just want to thank you all," he said, voice booming, "for making the time to celebrate with us today. 70 years. Not bad, huh?" Laughter. He turned toward Everett. "And thank you, son, for stepping up, for being the man this family needed, taking over, taking care of business." That's legacy. That's leadership." I swallowed hard. Then he chuckled. "And Coraline's always been helpful in small ways. She keeps the coffee coming." The crowd chuckled politely. My hand was literally holding a tray of drinks for the older guests who had arrived late. The timing couldn't have been crueler if it were scripted. I stood there, still. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just nodded, handed off the last drink, and stepped back into the corner like a fixture in a room no one bothered to dust. Not shame, not even anger, just clarity. They believed their own performance. Later, during the group photo, I was handed someone's phone and asked to take the picture. "You're good with tech, right?" one uncle joked. I pressed the shutter button 5 times and didn't ask to be in one. After the photos, a woman with a perfect blowout approached me. "Everything looks stunning," she said. "You must be Everett's event planner." "How long have you worked with him?" I smiled. "We're related," I said gently. "Oh!" She blinked, looked me up and down, then shifted her gaze back to the bar. "Well, you really know how to throw a party." She was gone before I could respond. I turned toward the photo setup again and watched Everett posing with Horace and Uncle Dave, Everett's arm around Horace's shoulder like a crown he'd inherited early. Press cameras clicked. I stood behind the catering table. A flash of memory, my 6th birthday, our backyard. Dad had taken a photo of Everett blowing out my candles. I'd been cropped out of the final print. I felt the same now, cut off at the edge, blurred into the background. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Tegan. Check LinkedIn. Everett just posted. Claims he's now CEO of Bridge. I didn't even blink. Just turned off the screen and slipped it back into my pocket. No confrontation, no scene. But in my mind, I started making a timeline. I noted who was chatting with the reporters, who referenced our family foundation, who mentioned my name in passing like it was a borrowed footnote. Sometimes the best way to scream is to stay calm. Calm is terrifying when unexpected. I found Horace chatting with a golf buddy as I slipped the wrapped frame into his hands. Happy birthday, I said quietly. He glanced down. Oh, thanks, Coraline. He said it beside an untouched mimosa and turned back to his conversation. No eye contact. No interest in the gift. I walked toward the elevator. No one followed. No one called my name, except one voice. Miss, the caterer said, catching up. You left this envelope. Tip for the staff. That was very kind. I nodded. They're the only ones working today. Back home, I poured a glass of water, sat at my desk, and pulled up Everett's new post. Proud to lead Project Bridge into a new era, I said it out loud. They really think silence equals surrender. I opened my resume, updated my job history. Every role, every title, every year of sweat they'd tried to scrub clean. I restored them all with dates, links, metrics. Then I drafted a letter to the nonprofit registry requesting a public revalidation of my status as founder. I attached documents, board meeting notes, original incorporation papers. No angry tweets, no blog post, just action. I opened my planner and wrote, everything they ignore today will become undeniable tomorrow. Then I closed it. The louder they got, the quieter I became. And still, I was the only one they heard. I walked into the office on Tuesday expecting a normal morning. Coffee, emails, reviewing a few applications for our grant cycle. Instead, there was a package on my desk with a bright yellow label that read, PR Kit, Community Spotlight Campaign. I raised an eyebrow. Did you know this was coming? I asked Jenna, my assistant. She shook her head. Nope. It was delivered late yesterday. I left it for you. I opened the box. Inside were printed brochures, a mock-up of a billboard, and a one-sheet media brief. At the top, Project Bridge, founded by Everett Sable. His face was front and center, arms crossed confidently, with a tagline about innovating digital justice for the underserved. I flipped through page after page. My name didn't appear once. This was the 4th media piece this month to erase me completely. I sat down, staring at the photo of Everett shaking hands with a city council member in a space I had helped fund, helped build, every inch of it. I opened our organization's Instagram, logged out, tried to log back in. Wrong password. I blinked, typed again. Wrong password. I checked the forgot password option. It went to Everett's email address. I tried the Facebook page, same issue. Twitter, locked. Then I opened the website. I clicked the About tab. It loaded a sleek new bio. Project Bridge was founded in 2020 by Everett Sable, a tech entrepreneur passionate about social equity. There was no board tab anymore. My phone buzzed. Tegan. Your website's About page, it's gone, and your name's not on the board tab either. I didn't say anything. Coraline? She pressed. I leaned back in my chair. He didn't just take the mic, I said. He changed the script. I clicked on the site footer. The hosting provider had been switched to a private registrar, not under our shared account anymore. Even the contact email had changed. He hijacked it, I said, more to myself than to Tegan. This isn't branding, she said. It's identity theft, emotional and professional. I sat there, stunned. For a moment, I felt like I was watching someone else's life dissolve. But I wasn't crying, not this time. Instead, I opened my backup drive. I still had the original domain purchase confirmation, dated 2 months before Everett joined the project, the nonprofit registration forms, the 501c3 letter with my name on the IRS document. And still, I felt that sting, like betrayal by paper cut. Small, precise, bleeding. My thoughts wandered to the early days of Bridge. I had no funding, no logo, no website. Just an idea and a 10-page grant proposal. Everett offered to help make it look polished. Said he'd build the site, run the back end. I was grateful. I gave him access. "You'll still be the face," he'd said. I'd laughed. "I don't care about the spotlight. I just want the work to be real." I never changed the admin password. I told myself that giving him credit was strategic, that it would protect the mission, that as long as the work got done, I didn't need applause. Now here we were. The work was alive. But I was invisible. Not anymore. I opened a blank document and started writing. Not a press release, not a blog post. A letter. It read, "To our partners, supporters, and collaborators. You know me. You've worked with me. If my silence has helped others rise, it was never meant to help me disappear. Bridge was founded with intention, community, and integrity. That hasn't changed. What has changed is who gets credit for work they didn't do. This isn't about ego, it's about accuracy. Let's keep doing the work, together, and honestly, sincerely, Coraline Vesper." I saved the letter. Then I created a folder on Google Drive called Bridge Origins. I uploaded everything: the original pitch deck, founding documents, board resolutions, initial grant approvals. A video clip from our first community launch, me cutting the ribbon. Once done, I made a quiet post on my personal LinkedIn. There's a difference between stepping aside and being shoved out of frame. I've always believed in collaboration, but collaboration doesn't mean erasure. Let's build, but let's be honest about who laid the foundation. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. But it was seen. Within an hour, my inbox started pinging. Former collaborators commented, "I remember that launch. You were incredible. I still use the resource guide you created." Donors asked, "What's going on?" I didn't feed it. I let the truth simmer. I left the office early, walking down the sidewalk like I had somewhere specific to be, even if I didn't. But I did stop at a coffee shop and pull out my laptop. I bought a new domain name, bridgeforreal.org. Then I filed paperwork to re-register the nonprofit under a new legal name, retaining the original programs, partnerships, and history. He could have the platform. I would keep the purpose. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to ask, "What will they say?" Now the question was, "What will I say next?" Apologies are for accidents. This was not one. So I stopped apologizing. The next message wouldn't be a clarification. It would be a correction. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. "Ms. Vesper?" the voice asked, professional but tight. "This is Layla from Creative Roots Printing. We ran your usual order of outreach flyers through billing, but the card was declined. Twice." My stomach turned. "That's not possible," I said. "Run it again. It's a company card." "We did. The bank flagged it. You might want to check in with them." I hung up, opened the banking app on my phone. My heart stopped. Account frozen. A red banner across the top. Under financial review. I called the number on the screen. "We received a flag tied to the organization's EIN," the representative said. "Due to a dispute linked to recent activity, we've been asked to place a hold on your funds until it's resolved." "Who filed the dispute?" I asked. "I'm not authorized to disclose that," he replied, but I knew. Everett. He'd weaponized the very structure I built to make sure I couldn't touch it. I didn't panic. I documented. Screenshots, email timestamps, a paper trail. I pulled out my notebook and began writing everything down by hand. Time, date, call summary. I didn't flinch. Later that afternoon, I logged into our usual grant portal. I wanted to make sure our next round of funding wasn't delayed. My login worked, but something felt off. The application dashboard showed a recently submitted proposal. My name was on it. My organization's tax ID, the nonprofit's mission and reach. But the language, it wasn't mine. The tone, the phrasing, it was all Everett. His voice, his twist on my work. He hadn't just stolen access. He was now writing as me. They didn't just take the stage. They forged the invite list and signed my name at the door. The rage came in waves, but controlled, precise, like steel being sharpened. That evening, Tegan came over. She didn't knock twice. She entered holding 2 coffees, a manila folder, and the look of someone ready to swing. "You need to stop playing nice," she said, tossing her bag down. "Teague, no," she cut me off. "This isn't family drama. It's fraud." I explained what happened. The account freeze, the ghost-written grant, the full-scale hijack. "He's used your name to funnel money," she said. "You realize that's a federal crime, right?" "I know." She pulled out her laptop, opening side-by-side windows of the IRS registration database and our original incorporation files. "This was your signature. This is your date stamp. This is your creation." "I have all the files," I said quietly. "Good," she snapped. "Now let's use them." We scanned in every piece of original documentation, found emails where I had introduced Everett as a volunteer, meeting minutes where I was referred to as director and he as support. Even a few Zoom calls I had forgotten were recorded. I created a PDF timeline, color-coded, annotated. I named it, simply, History They Can't Edit. We saved it to my drive. 2 external backups, one on Tegan's USB, one to the cloud. Then we called a lawyer, not a large firm, just a solo civil rights attorney who'd handled cases like mine before, clean, sharp, and most importantly, quiet. By Thursday night, a formal cease and desist was on its way to Everett. Attached was a notification to every major funder he'd recently contacted using my EIN, alerting them of fraudulent representation. I remembered a quote I'd once highlighted in a book years ago. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Eleanor Roosevelt. Well, I was done consenting. This wasn't family anymore. This was criminal, and I would no longer cushion it with silence. At 11:47 that night, I logged into an old blog I hadn't touched in over a year, just a little corner of the internet where I used to write reflections on nonprofit work, leadership, burnout. It had 63 subscribers. I never thought anyone read it, but tonight, it was the right place. I wrote, "There's a difference between giving credit and giving your identity away. I did one, someone else chose the other. I am not lost. I am not confused. I've simply been quiet, and quiet doesn't mean absent. Quiet doesn't mean permission. Quiet means I've been watching, taking notes. But now the record begins. I didn't name Everett. I didn't even mention him. But anyone who knew would know." I hit publish. Then I powered off my laptop, made tea, washed my face, and for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. No spreadsheets haunting me, no internal dialogues debating whether I was being too dramatic. Just a peace that came from motion. If he wanted my silence, he should have remembered. I write everything down. The envelope was thick, too thick for anything casual. It came by certified mail, signed for by Jenna at the front desk. She handed it to me like it might burn. I thanked her, took it into my office, and closed the door. It was from a law firm in town I recognized, one Everett had name-dropped before in a brag about tight compliance and business-forward counsel. I slit the seal open. The heading read, "Notice of Investigation, Alleged Financial Misconduct, Project Bridge, my name, my organization's EIN." Every legal mark of the nonprofit I had built. I read the opening line twice before it landed. I was being investigated for financial misconduct, allegedly mishandling funds, tied to our most recent grant cycle, except I hadn't filed that cycle. The breath caught in my throat, then dropped somewhere in my stomach. This wasn't a mistake. It was a trap. I set the envelope down, hands calm, but mind on fire. If he'd weaponized legal process, it meant Everett was ready to go nuclear, and I would not let him blow this thing up without taking responsibility for every wire he cut. Tegan sent me a text 10 minutes later. "You need to see this. Reddit's melting." A link followed. I clicked. A post titled, "Whistleblower Reveals Founder of Nonprofit Misused Funds," sat at the top of the front page of a local community forum. It had screenshots, quotes, claims of ghost donors, inflated budgets, missing reports. I scrolled. One line stood out in bold. Confirmed by family source. I nearly dropped the phone. The phrasing, some of it was mine. Sentences I'd written years ago in a private message to Everett. Lines I remembered typing while venting late one night during our first chaotic year, trying to process a missed payment from a city partner. He'd kept my words, just long enough to twist them. He kept my words just long enough to weaponize them. A few clicks later, I found a burner Gmail forwarded the same allegations to the local press. I recognized the language again, the same cadence Everett used when he tried to sound corporate. I called Tegan. "It's him," I said. "I know. He's launching a full smear. He's scared." "Of what?" She paused. "You finally stopped whispering." We met later that day at a coffee shop near the audit office. My lawyer had already begun preparing a formal rebuttal and requesting the metadata of the financial documents Everett had filed using my EIN. "This reeks of premeditated misrepresentation," my attorney said. "But legally, you're not cornered, you're surrounded." I didn't blink. "Then I guess it's time to set the fire exit." Tegan joined me in my apartment that evening, laptop in hand. "I ran a digital forensic trace on your shared Google Drive," she said. "And? 6 months ago, someone logged in from a New York IP. Same as Everett's travel schedule back then." I leaned forward. "What did they do?" "They downloaded files, then re-uploaded slightly edited versions with different timestamps. Made it look like you changed them after submission." "He didn't just lie," I whispered. "He repainted the truth with stolen brushes." We spent the next 3 hours building the master file. Every original version of every document, notes from board meetings, email chains, Zoom recordings. "Print everything," I said. "Already started." I stood in front of the printer, watching page after page come out like receipts for a debt I never owed. I put them into a binder labeled, "Proof, Originals Only." Then, for the first time that week, I walked into the bathroom, looked myself in the mirror, and said out loud, "He's not my rival. He's my brother." The words didn't feel like a revelation, they felt like a funeral. The echo hit me harder than I expected, not because I didn't know it, but because saying it aloud made it real. I didn't lose a nonprofit. I lost the last piece of family I hadn't questioned. Tears came, not from fear, but grief. I let them fall, then wiped my face, walked into my bedroom, and changed into clean clothes. The next morning, I met with a journalist I used to trust. She'd covered our launch, quoted me directly, written glowingly about our mission. I didn't give her a scoop, just a quote. "If telling the truth is considered retaliation," I said, "maybe we should rethink who's attacking who." I handed her an envelope. Inside, the original documents, timestamps, and my cease and desist letters. She looked up. "Do you want this to go wide?" "No," I said. "I just want it to go real." We shook hands. She left. I stood outside the cafe a moment longer, watching the street, listening to the wind whip past the awning. "I'm not out to win this," I murmured. "I'm just not going to lose quietly." "Let them keep the microphones. I'm wiring the speakers now." The subject line read, "Family Resolution Meeting, Saturday, 2 p.m. It came from my father's personal email, but was CC'd to Everett and to a mediator I'd never heard of. The tone was diplomatic. A safe space to find clarity and move forward as a family. It read more like PR than peace. I closed the laptop and sat back. They weren't extinguishing a fire. They were trying to contain it, with my water. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. The neutral venue was a business center conference room in Midtown, clean, impersonal, overlit. I walked in with a leather folio under one arm, my phone fully charged, and a thumb drive in my bag. Everett was already seated. Armani suit, calm smile, sipping from a plastic bottle of spring water like he was about to pitch a startup. Horace looked tired. His suit was pressed, but his shoulders slumped just slightly, maybe the weight of too many secrets. The mediator, a man in his 50s with a smooth voice and clipboard posture, greeted me with a nod. "Coraline, thank you for being here." I sat. Horace opened first. "I think we can all agree things have escalated unnecessarily. We're a family. These things don't belong in the media." Everett chimed in, voice calm, almost syrupy. "I'm willing to forgive, Coraline. We can reset. If you retract your blog post and legal filings, I can speak to the board. No hard feelings." I didn't blink. The mediator turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" "Just one thing," I said. "I brought audio." Everett's fingers twitched, just barely. I played the clip from my phone. Everett's voice came through, clear and smug. "She won't fight it. She never does. Let her keep her little office while I scale this thing properly." Silence. Horace's face drained of color. His hand gripped the armrest. I slid a file across the table to the mediator. "Included are copies of transfers made from Dad's account during his recovery from the first stroke," I said. "He wasn't mentally cleared at the time. These were signed with pressure, not permission." Horace flipped through the first few pages, then stopped. His voice broke. "While I was unconscious?" I nodded. "You signed over your trust. You don't remember. But the paperwork remembers everything." He looked at Everett. "You said we were protecting the family's name." Everett's tone snapped to defensive. "She's manipulating this. You know how she gets emotional." I cut in. "Emotion didn't forge your signature. You did." Horace stood abruptly and walked out. For the first time, I saw fear in Everett's eyes. That night, back home, I uploaded the audio, the paperwork, and the timeline to a public transparency archive. Clean, unedited, no commentary, just truth. Then I sent the link to the Project Bridge board, along with a formal request for an emergency vote to remove Everett from all roles. Tegan texted me within minutes. "You didn't just break the silence, you rewired the mic." I smiled, but not from pride, from alignment. The facts were finally standing where they belonged. The press caught wind by sunrise. It wasn't instant praise. Some outlets questioned my timing. Others speculated about internal family rifts and jealous siblings. One headline read, "Sable Sisters Sparks Internal Coup." But by noon, things shifted. One of our oldest partner organizations posted, "Coraline was the first person to sit across our table and ask how we were really doing. We stand with her." Then another, "She wrote our first grant letter. She made space for people like us." The dominoes fell. An email came in from a major funder. "We've seen everything. We're staying with you." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Hours later, I walked into my office. Jenna looked up and smiled. "Our phones have been ringing all morning. People are asking how they can help." "Tell them," I said, "that the lights are still on." I made tea, opened my laptop, and looked out the window. This wasn't revenge. This was repair. This was the system snapping back into place, page by page, contract by contract, word by word. It had been a long storm, but the architecture I built had held. Truth doesn't knock. It blows the door down. And now the whole house is awake. I woke up to over 150 emails. Some were flagged urgent. A few came from journalists. Several from people I hadn't heard from in years. One just said, "You really did it, huh?" I blinked into the glow of my phone. My name was trending locally. Screenshots of the archive I'd published had gone viral. There were comments praising the bravery, and others tearing into me like I'd broken some sacred unspoken code. She aired out her own family. Classless. Finally, someone calling out the tech for good con artists. Why do women only speak up when it gets convenient? The high from yesterday, the feeling of clarity, of standing tall, had evaporated. Now it was a thick fog of pressure, the kind that lingers in your throat before you even get out of bed. They said I was invisible. Now I was everywhere, and they hated it. My phone lit up again. 53 missed calls. Horace, Everett, a few from numbers I didn't recognize. No voicemails, just missed call after missed call. I didn't need to listen to know the tone. It wouldn't be apologies. It wouldn't be accountability. They wanted damage control. Years ago, I would have answered. I used to pick up no matter how late the call, how bitter the last fight, how cutting the last word had been. That's what daughters do. That's what the nice ones do. This time, I flipped the phone over, face down, and let it buzz against the table like a warning I didn't need. By early afternoon, Tegan showed up. No announcement. She let herself in and headed straight for the kitchen. I heard the pop of a wine cork. "I brought Pinot and pizza," she called out, "because I know you haven't eaten anything but spite and adrenaline." She walked into the living room holding 2 glasses and a greasy cardboard box. I was still in yesterday's hoodie, staring at the TV. The news loop was playing a segment about me, my voice from the mediation, the photo of me at the non-profit launch, headlines spliced like a case file. Tegan handed me a glass. "You did the right thing. That doesn't mean it won't hurt." I sipped, then said, "I thought I'd feel powerful. Instead, I feel like I just broke the only bridge I had left." We sat in silence, the kind that didn't ask for words. I wasn't sure if I was grieving my brother or the illusion of what I thought family was. "Power doesn't always feel like fire," she said finally. "Sometimes it's just not folding." By Monday, the world had moved on, but not far. Online, I was getting DMs from people thanking me, and a fair share calling me a fraud, a drama queen, a traitor. In real life, my neighbors avoided eye contact. The barista I used to chat with gave me a tight smile and turned away before I could order. One colleague left the NGO with a vague email about new directions. I walked through my own office like a guest. The space felt unfamiliar. I wasn't guilty, but I was marked. I sat at my desk, pulled out my journal, and wrote, "It's wild how telling the truth makes you lonelier than lying ever did." Later that day, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text. A real letter. Envelope. Stamp. Horace's handwriting. I sat at my kitchen table and opened it with steady hands. "I didn't know," it began. "I should have asked more. But I also shouldn't have had to ask to be proud of you." I read it twice. "I need time, and I hope someday we'll sit at the same table again." I didn't cry. I didn't respond. I folded the letter back into its envelope, not out of respect, but out of precision. Sometimes, "I'm sorry," is just a pause before the next sentence of blame. The following morning, I walked the length of the office, nodding at the few staff who remained. Their faces were mixed. Pride, hesitation, loyalty tangled with worry. No one said it out loud, but I knew what they were wondering. Will we survive this? I didn't offer certainty. But I walked into my office, opened the website editor, and updated the homepage, built from truth, led without compromise. It stayed up for the rest of the week. I flipped to a blank page in my journal and wrote, "I didn't tell the truth to be believed. I told it to stop being erased." They called it war. I called it an ending. But endings always make room for something else. When I stepped into the office midweek, the applause caught me off guard. It wasn't loud, it wasn't performative, but it was there. Jenna stood, clapping softly, followed by Jamal from finance and 2 of our field coordinators. I didn't know if it was for the press coverage or the decision the board had made the night before. Maybe both. A newspaper clipping was pinned above the printer. The headline read, "Whistleblower's Truth Confirmed. Investigation Clears Coraline Vesper." I stood for a moment, absorbing it. This wasn't triumph, it was vindication. Not because I shouted, but because I never blinked. "Ready for the board meeting?" Jenna asked. I nodded. "Let's finish this." The boardroom was full, everyone seated except the chair left purposefully empty at the head of the table. Everett's nameplate had been removed. No one mentioned it. I took my place and passed out packets, legal documentation, verified timestamps, and a notarized letter from the state confirming misuse of identity and false filings submitted by Everett using my credentials. One board member leaned in. "You're requesting full removal?" I looked her in the eye. "I'm not requesting. I'm stating that it's already happened. This is formality." Another asked cautiously, "Do you want to pursue criminal charges?" I paused. Thought of the emails, the stolen logins. My father's face when he found out the trust was transferred under sedation. I didn't come here to destroy him, I said. I came here to reclaim myself. The vote was unanimous. The chair would remain empty until further notice. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop and found an email from someone I never expected to hear from again. I knew it wasn't you, it began. I just didn't know how to say it. It was from a silent partner, one of the original funders who had pulled away without explanation when the rumors started. Attached was a video file, dated 3 years ago, Everett, drunk at a tech mixer, bragging to someone off camera. She's the heart of it, sure. But you don't build a brand on heart. You build it on perception. I've got the face. She's just the back end. I didn't need to post it. It was enough to know it existed. Enough to remind myself that silence has an expiration date. Even borrowed confidence does. With Tegan's help, we spent the next few days rebranding everything. The website, the contracts, the pitch decks, all restored with my name, my voice, and the language I'd spent years honing. I wrote a new mission statement. Truth was always the foundation. Now it's the face too. Our homepage launched with that as the tagline. The intern I'd hired 6 weeks ago stopped me in the hallway. You showed us how to stand, she said, without screaming. It stuck with me. As the week wound down, I sat in my office and checked my messages. One from Everett, no apology, just a line. I won't fight it, hope you're happy. I read it once, deleted it. No reply needed. Horace hadn't called. I didn't expect him to. He had already made his choice the moment he believed Everett's version of events without ever asking for mine. Sometimes silence is the most honest goodbye, and for the first time, I felt no sadness in that. Only space. Later that evening, as the sky dimmed and the office emptied out, I stayed behind. I reached for the framed letter on my desk, my mother's words. You always took care of the pieces others dropped. That's not weakness, that's quiet strength. She had known, long before I did. I opened my journal and wrote, this story wasn't about being louder than them, it was about outlasting the lie. Then I opened my computer. The folder I had carried like armor for months, truth if needed, I closed it for good, not deleted, just no longer in use. Some echoes fade, others build into something you can stand on. I turned off every notification on my phone. The blinking, the buzzing, the constant hum of next could wait. For the first time in years, the pressure to respond, to react, wasn't there. It wasn't needed. I brewed my coffee slowly, not because I had time, but because I had decided to take it. I sat by the window, watching the late morning sun filter through the blinds, and opened my journal. No rush, no list, no flames to put out. The quote I wrote at the top of the page was something I'd once read in passing, but never forgot. Closure doesn't knock. You have to build the door yourself. And so, I picked up my pen. Later that afternoon, I found myself staring at the forged financial report again. The one Everett had submitted in my name, pretending I'd mishandled funds. I remembered the moment I first saw it, how my stomach turned, and I remembered how, just for a second, I doubted myself. Did I really forget to update that file? Was I careless? Was it me? That hesitation hadn't come from confusion. It had been planted over years. Little comments, dismissive glances, being told I almost got it right one too many times. They made me question what I built with my own hands. Not anymore. I folded the document and placed it back in my file cabinet. Not because I needed to reread it again, but because I didn't need it anymore to know what was real. By early evening, I laced up my shoes and headed out to the trail behind the reservoir. It was the same one Mom and I used to walk when I was a teenager, before she got sick, before everything with Everett became about image and performance. Each step forward felt like leaving something behind. The silence of the trees, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet, the wind moving branches overhead. It was the only kind of quiet I welcomed. I thought about my father cutting off my sentences mid-idea, about Everett nodding politely while using my words in his presentations, about funders ghosting me without explanation. And I kept walking. This isn't loneliness, I whispered. This is space. When I returned home, I did what I had avoided for 2 days. I opened my email. Among the newsletters and junk was one message. Subject line, thank you. It was from a former intern. one I had mentored years ago during our first summer grant. "You changed my life," she wrote. "You taught me I didn't need to wait for permission to be who I am. I just wanted you to know I never forgot that." I read it 3 times. Even in the silence, my work had echoed. The next morning, I opened the back end of the NGO's website. The site had been restored for weeks, but this was the first time I made a new edit, not to add my name, but to write a sentence that finally said it right. This organization was built by many hands, but it began with one woman's refusal to be erased. I clicked save. Then I mailed out thank you packages. Every staff member who stayed, every donor who came back, every volunteer who didn't flinch when things got uncomfortable. Inside each box, a handwritten card, a quote from my mother, and a pen. "For your part in the story, keep writing. Success isn't being loud. It's being undeniable, even when they try to deny you." That afternoon, I opened a drawer in my desk and pulled out a sheet of stationery. I wrote a letter, not out of guilt or nostalgia, out of finality. "Dear Dad, you said I was just a burden. Turns out I was the backbone." I didn't mail it. I folded it carefully, placed it in my journal, and closed the cover. Glennon Doyle once said, "You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." And I was done burning. This wasn't the peace I waited for. It's the peace I made. 2 weeks after the press had cooled and the dust had settled, I stood backstage at a national nonprofit summit in San Francisco. A woman with a clipboard whispered, "You're on in 5, before stepping back into the hallway. I adjusted the mic clipped to my collar. The weight of the room didn't scare me, not anymore. I wasn't the +1. I wasn't the ghostwriter behind a campaign. Today, I was the headline. When they called my name, I walked on stage to a room of hundreds. No music, no preamble, just me. I took a breath and spoke. I used to believe truth didn't need to be loud, that it would rise on its own, find its way to the surface. Then I realized, it doesn't rise unless you raise it, and it doesn't survive unless it's heard. The applause wasn't loud at first, it was honest, and that made it enough. They tried to bury me in silence, but I used every grain of that dirt to rise. Half an hour later, I unveiled the new platform I'd been building quietly behind the scenes. Found Her. A nonprofit initiative dedicated to supporting women who had been erased, overwritten, or pushed aside in their own work, funded by former donors who had walked away from Project Bridge during the scandal and came back when the truth surfaced. I stood beside the new logo, a simple outline of a woman standing behind her own shadow. "Sometimes justice isn't a courtroom," I said. "It's a stage, a spotlight, and your voice, unshaken." Social media picked it up within minutes. "Dignified revenge," one headline read. "The most graceful takedown we've seen in years," said another. But I didn't feel like I'd taken anything down. I just stood back up. Everett, meanwhile, disappeared from the internet. No LinkedIn updates, no interviews, just one final tweet. "There's no honor in being right when you hurt the people closest to you." I didn't respond. I posted a quote instead. "Closure isn't vengeance, it's clarity." That week, I learned he'd been removed from every remaining board he held. His silence wasn't redemption, it was consequence. Days later, I received an email from Horace. "You didn't deserve what I said," it read, "or how I treated you. I don't expect forgiveness." But I needed to say it. I didn't reply. I bookmarked it, not for sentiment, for record. Some men think repentance is earned through regret. I believe it starts with accountability. Project Bridge's homepage now listed me, clearly, permanently, as its sole founder. No footnotes, no revisions, no shared credit where it wasn't due. An article in the Chronicle called my story a modern cautionary tale of quiet power. At a youth center funded by our outreach program, they unveiled a mural. It bore my mother's words. "You don't have to burn bright to build something that lasts." I stood in front of it for a long time. I didn't take a photo. I didn't post it. I just stood there and felt what legacy was supposed to feel like, unannounced but undeniable. At the close of the summit, they asked me to give a final thought to the audience. I looked out at the crowd. Dozens of women, students, community leaders, older women in cardigans, younger ones with ambition tucked behind tired eyes. And I said, I didn't ask to be the cautionary tale, but if I'm going to be one, let it teach people to never let others write them out of their own story. No applause needed. I walked off stage, not to noise, but to peace. This wasn't about being remembered by them. It was about becoming unforgettable. I never wanted revenge. But now, my name is what they say when they talk about what not to steal.